Okay, so these are all concepts that we have covered in physical science when I had you last year. So real quick run through of basic biochemistry. Biochemistry, the word chemistry obviously is atoms and molecules and reactions, and looking at the energy of reactions. When you stick bio in front of it, now we only care about the chemistry of life, chemistry of living things. Okay, you're in biology now, and so we're focused on living things. Biochemical reactions are the chemistry of life. Why you are not dead is because this stuff is going on inside your cells. Okay, so some basic chemistry concepts that you need to know that we reviewed already. That elements are a pure substance. The smallest part of that is an atom. Compounds is a substance made up of more than one kind of element, and the smallest unit of that is a molecule. So if you were to take a piece of gold jewelry and cut it in half, and then cut it in half again, and then cut it in half again, and keep cutting it in half, you'd reach some point where you only had one atom of gold. And at that point, if you cut that atom of gold in half, it would cease to be gold and start to be something else. And so an element is a pure substance made up of only one kind of atom, and an atom is the smallest unit of that element that behaves like itself. A compound is a substance made up of multiple kinds of atoms that are joined together chemically. And the smallest unit of that thing that behaves like itself is a molecule. So like if you had your plastic pencil and you looked at the plastic barrel on the pencil, you cut it in half, cut it in half, cut it in half, cut. At some point, you would reach the smallest unit of stuff that behaves like plastic. And that would be a molecule of that pencil. Okay, so these are some terms that you've had many, many times in the past. Chemical reactions involve the breaking and making of bonds between atoms. So when a chemical reaction happens, you have a molecule of a certain composition that runs into another molecule of a certain composition, and they exchange atoms, and that's a chemical reaction. So the breaking of old bonds, the making of new bonds. Whenever that happens, it takes energy. Some chemical reactions give off energy because they release more than they took to get started, but every chemical reaction takes some amount of energy to get started. And the terminology for that we hit last year when we did physical science was the activation energy, the amount of energy it needs to get going. And so all chemical reactions take that little piece of energy to get started. And the more energy available, the faster that reaction can happen. When you have a very high activation energy, which is common in biological systems, that you've got to really have a lot of energy to do something, it's very hard to get it done. And so your body makes use of catalysts. Catalysts, remember from last year, are substances that lower the activation energy of a reaction. They let the reaction happen faster. If you think of a roller coaster, you sit in the roller coaster, and the old style roller coaster that has to use a chain to pull you to the top of the hill, and then it lets you go, and you get to go, whee, and have a good time, right? The chain pulling you to the top of the hill is the activation energy. And then once you're released, you can go do whatever the reaction is. A catalyst makes that hill smaller. It lowers the amount of energy that has to be added to a system to get the chemical reaction to happen. We spent a lot of time on these concepts last year. I hope that your brain is finding this information and you're kind of able to remember it. There's an important word called an enzyme, and an enzyme is simply a catalyst in a biological system. So when your cells are doing this complicated chemistry of life to keep you alive, and they use catalysts to lower the activation energy to make these chemical reactions easier to happen, we call those enzymes, and they're usually made out of proteins. And so proteins, amongst many, many other things, can serve as enzymes and can make chemical reactions easier to occur. Okay? So these are terms that we've already introduced you to last year, and I hope that they are on the top of your brain. Okay, so diffusion and transport. This is the other concept that we need to hit with regard to this chapter, so that you understand, how to go forward with conceptualizing chemistry and biological systems. Substances move because of random molecular motion, and we call that movement diffusion. So, if I were to open a bottle of something stinky, like ammonia, or some other foul-smelling thing, and if I were to set it on Alyssa's desk here, Alyssa would smell it right away because it's on her desk. And then before too long, Marissa and Kiana would start to smell it because they're nearby. But it would take longer for that group over there, Caleb, to be able to smell the stinky stuff, because the molecules of the stinky chemical are going to take some time to spread out throughout the room. Eventually, it would fill the room. The gas of the stinky stuff would fill the room, and we would all be smelling it. But it would take some time. And so that general slow spreading out of a substance we call diffusion. And diffusion happens all the time. And it happens in biological systems when one cell manufactures something and then just kicks it out there into the body, usually through the blood, and it spreads out throughout the body. So, for example, you're walking home at night from some friend's house, and you don't live too far away, so your parents are fine with you walking home. But then somebody jumps out of the bushes and scares you, and it's dark, and all of a sudden you're like, "Rah!" And your adrenal glands have made a chemical, and adrenaline, and they push it into your bloodstream. And it only takes just a few seconds for that chemical to make it through all the cells of your body, and then your muscles are ready to go. And you're either going to fight this person, or you're going to run like you've never run before. And that takes just a few seconds to ramp you up. And that's because of diffusion, this spreading out of its substance. And that chemical puts you into hyperdrive mode, makes you hulk out, right? And so that's an example of diffusion. It's made somewhere, and then it gets passed around and spread out through the body so that it's useful everywhere. Okay? Diffusion is a very common concept in chemistry. It's important in biology as well. When we're talking about how a cell gets something inside of it, this is kind of new. We didn't talk about these functions in physical science. You did cover them in life science. So now I'm talking about 2 years ago. But you have seen these words before. Okay, it's been a while. So I'm going to make sure that you understand these. Passive transport, facilitated transport, and active transport. These are when a cell needs to get something inside of it that is currently outside the cell, or vice versa. There's something in the cell that the cell would like to dump, and so it needs to get it out. The cell membranes, the walls of cells, are semi-permeable. We have that in life science as well. Semi-permeable means some things can go in and out of it, and some things can't. Okay? Our classroom has a doorway, and that doorway is semi-permeable. People can fit through the door, which is good, because we're all people and we should come to class and leave class at some point. But it is not permeable to rhinoceroses and elephants, right? Rhinoceroses and elephants cannot come into my classroom. If we wanted to let a rhinoceros or an elephant come into my classroom, we would have to open the wall up and make it bigger so that they could come in. Okay, now it's a silly example, but that's the concept of semi-permeable. Some things can go through, some things cannot go through. Your cells have a membrane around them that allows certain molecules to pass through just fine, no problem at all, and certain molecules can't. And so if something can just diffuse through the cell, then it's called passive transport, and it just cruises right in there. Okay, water can go right into and out of cells with no trouble at all. So water goes into and out of cells through passive transport. Diffusion only, that's all that it takes. Okay? But larger things like food molecules, okay? I had sausage and pancakes for breakfast this morning. It was awesome. And the large protein molecules and the complex carbohydrates that I ate this morning are not able to just float into a cell. They would hit the cell membrane and bounce off. So the cell wants the proteins and the complex carbohydrates. So it has to get them in there somehow. There's two ways that it can do it. One is called facilitated transport, and this is when it has to move through specific channels in the cell's membrane. So the cell membrane would have a particular door that molecule fits through. And that molecule can only come or go through the cell if it goes through that door. Okay, so it's a special portal in the cell that thing can come in and out of. Active transport is when the cell needs to spend energy to actually pump something in or out of the cell. And in the course of biology, we will learn lots of other examples of active transport. But for right now, just know that it's when the cell has to pump something in or out of the cell, and it takes energy from the cells to spend energy to get that done. So here's some pictures for you. If I can get my mouse to them. Here's some pictures for you. No, really, it's exciting. There you go. So passive and active transport. If this substance A, can just zip through the cell membrane and it doesn't need anything special, that's passive transport. Okay? No mediation needed. Then there's facilitated transport, which they've got two different sorts of pictures here. This is a college level. Don't worry about the students here. If it takes a special doorway, a special carrier protein in the cell to allow the substance to go through, that's facilitated transport. Okay? And then if the cell has to spend energy to pump something across the cell membrane, that's active transport. The capital letters and lowercase letters are to represent concentration. Passive transport or diffusion can only go from where there's more of something to where there's less of something. Active transport is able to take something and pump it against what we call the concentration gradient, against the natural flow of that substance. So it can take something that is less populated outside the cell and pump what little there is out there into the cell where there's already more of it. Your books describes those in more detail. We did talk about concentration gradients in physical science. So active transport can go against the concentration gradient. There's your next one. And here we go with what's going to be on the advanced. So this goes, the first part goes in the true of all biomolecules, right in the middle. So biomolecules, this is new. This is something that you've not covered. And in the advanced organizer I gave you right in the middle, true of all biomolecules. Biomolecules are always repeated small units. And we use the word monomer for that. Mere is a root that means unit of something, okay, a piece of something, a unit of something. So a monomer, a monomer, has only one unit of this. It's a simple molecule, one little molecule. Think of like a string of pearls in a necklace. A pearl would be a monomer, and you put a whole bunch of those together, and now you have multiple units, polymers. And so you have more units of that. You've got one molecule that was strung together with a couple hundred of its friends to make a polymer, okay? So the biomolecules that make up all living things are huge molecules. The largest molecule we have discovered is DNA, right? It's a monstrously large molecule. When you think about the fact that atoms are so small that we can barely image them with the best electron microscopes that we have, itsy bitsy teeny tiny things that are so small that it's silly. But you get so many of these things strung together to make the human DNA that one cell's DNA is 6 feet long, right? You have a 6 foot long molecule coiled up in every single cell of your body. So these biomolecules are just monstrous, large molecules, but they're all made up of smaller molecules strung together, okay? So in all of these biomolecules, and there are 4 categories: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. In all 4 of these, there is going to be a small repeated unit, and then there's going to be what the big string of them can do, okay? So carbohydrates, we're used to this word if you talk about diet and health. Carbohydrates are sugars and grains and starches, and these are the things that your body goes to first for energy. So again, I had pancakes and sausage this morning for breakfast. My body will eventually digest the sausage for energy, but the first thing it's going after is the pancakes, because that's easy. It's a ready source of energy. And pancakes are full of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are useful for food molecules. They are used for short and medium-term energy storage, and that is basically true of the simple sugars, the monosaccharides. Examples of monosaccharides would be like fructose and glucose and things of that nature. Your body can just get the energy out of it really quickly. Medium and long-term energy storage in plants, they tend to string a whole bunch of these sugars together. And they also build the body of the plant is usually strings of sugars. So most of your flesh is not sugar. Most of your flesh is protein. But the most of the body of a plant is sugar. Okay? Just a whole bunch of sugar molecules strung together. So if we have just one sugar molecule by himself floating in space, like glucose, hi, my name is glucose, okay? One sugar molecule, we call that a monosaccharide. Saccharide is a word for sugar. Mono means one, so this is one sugar molecule. These are things that you probably want to avoid in your diet because they give your body a huge amount of energy real quick, and then they tend to crash your energy level afterwards. It's what causes all the blood sugar spikes. You eat too much of that, you become diabetic. These are the rapid, I need energy right now, and I don't care about tomorrow molecules. Okay. The small chains of them. There's actually two kinds of polymer carbohydrates. There's polysaccharides that have 2 or maybe 3 sugar molecules strung together. Those are what we call complex carbs, and that's what you get from pancakes, bread, eating whole grain cereal, those kinds of things. A couple of sugar molecules strung together. It's a little harder for your body to get the energy out of it, which means that it's slower release into your bloodstream, and it's better for sustained energy. Small polymers we call polysaccharides, more than one sugar molecule. Okay. Or in the diet nutrition world, they're called complex carbohydrates. Then when you get into very large strings of these, they're also technically polysaccharides, but they're so big we don't use that term. Here we're talking about hundreds or thousands of sugar molecules strung together. Okay? Hundreds or thousands of sugar molecules strung together we call starches or cellulose. Cellulose is the main structural component for plants. If you eat celery, I love celery, I just got hungry saying that. And you take a bite of celery, okay? Take a bite of cellary, and then as you pull it away from your mouth, there's like a little string, right? The fiber that comes apart in the celery. Oh, it's great. That little string is cellulose, okay? And lots of other things are cellulose too, but that's the great example of it. It's a very hard, strong material that the plant uses for structure, like we would use rebar in building, okay? And it's a very strong molecule. You can't digest it. All of that stringiness that you chew up and swallow does not get digested by you. It just gets flushed through your body and helps things keep moving, I would say, right? Cellulose is the main structural molecule of plants. We would call it fiber in our diet when we eat it. Critters like goats and cows can actually digest and get nutrition from it, but we can't. Starches we can break down. Starches you find in like potatoes and those sorts of vegetables, where there's still a good pile of carbohydrates there, but it takes some more work to get out. So here's some pictures. Simple carbohydrates, glucose, one sugar molecule. Sugars are usually rings like this. Remember rings? Okay, this is glucose. If you take 2 sugar molecules and stick them together, you have a disaccharide like sucrose. Okay, lactose would be another one. Or you can string lots and lots and lots of them together. Here are some common, very large complex carbohydrates. So glycogen is this thing it's going to be hundreds and thousands of sugar molecules strung together into this branching, looks almost like a coral compound. Okay, amylopectin is another one that you're going to find in fruits quite often. Huge chains, lots and lots and lots of sugar molecules stuck together. And then amylose is this, looks like a telephone cord. It's a spiral made up of hundreds and thousands of sugar molecules. Okay, so these things can get very, very big. These, your body has a really hard time getting nutrition from. They tend to just become fiber in your diet. Your body can take 1 and 2 and 3 sugar molecules and turn them into energy. Okay. The next one is proteins. Okay, so proteins. We were talking about proteins. These are the large structural molecules in you. We said that carbohydrates are the structural molecule for plants and funguses, and proteins are the structural molecule for you. You are mostly proteins. Animals are mostly proteins. They also facilitate complex chemical reactions as enzymes. We said in the several slides ago that the chemical reactions in biological systems are hugely complicated, and catalysts and enzymes make those reactions easier to do because they lower the amount of energy needed for the reaction to happen. And those catalysts and enzymes are proteins in biological systems. Okay? Just like all biomolecules, thank you, Wookie. Just like all biomolecules, they are made up of small molecules that have been repeated a bunch of times. So in proteins, the small molecules are amino acids, that's the monomer. And the polymers are we call polypeptide chains. Poly meaning many, peptide because that's the name of the kind of bond between amino acids. So you have an amino acid, and the bond that joins them is a peptide bond. So when you have lots of those, it's a polypeptide chain. Okay, so, and then proteins are not just usually one polypeptide. Usually a protein is several polypeptides that have been woven and folded and smashed together in complex patterns to make the functional protein. And so it actually has 4 levels of complexity, and I'll show you a picture of that. So some pictures for you. Here we have, an amino acid covered by my video. Let me move my video down. Whoa, magic. Okay, so this is an example of an amino acid. You don't need to know the structure, but you should recognize it. It's got a nitrogen group, and then 2 carbons and some oxygens. And then what matters is this thing called an R group, and that's what's different in each amino acid, is this part of the molecule. This will not be on the test, but just to show you the structure of an amino acid, okay? It's this thing that hangs off of the middle carbon that makes an amino acid whatever it is. So an amino acid is the monomer of a protein, and they get joined together by these peptide bonds, and the string of amino acids that is a polypeptide chain is very, very, very long. Hundreds, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of base pairs of amino acids long. Very, very long molecules. And it's not just this string. We've got to fold them and make them pretty, basically. So there's all kinds of different structures. The primary structure of an amino acid chain is just the order that the amino acids sit in. And all of these 3-letter abbreviations are different kinds of amino acids. You don't need to know them. But there's all these different kinds of amino acids. So the primary structure is this string of them. And then the secondary structure is what happens to that string. Does it get folded back on itself to make a sheet? Or does it spiral? Or does it do other sorts of things? Just that string, what happens to it? And then those things get woven together into another and yet another layer of complexity. We have multiple polypeptide chains that get woven together, and then often those woven together knots of several different polypeptide chains sit next to other polypeptide chains so that they can work together on something. It's this
ridiculously complicated structure. And when you look at this, I don't understand how a biochemist can be an atheist. Like, how much information is here? It's not just the information of the DNA, but it's the information for the order, for what that thing itself does, for how it's woven together with others, and how it plays nicely with its friends. That makes it work. And it's just incredible, the amount of information that's in there. And God is speaking to us through all of this. Like, you know, the Psalms say, the heavens declare the glory of God, so do your proteins. They just scream, there's a God, there's a God, look what he made. Lipids and nucleic acids are the last two kinds of biomolecules. So, give you a moment to write that down. Just a moment. Okay, so biomolecule number 3 are lipids. Lipids is the group that contains fats, oils, and waxes. So olive oil, butter, and the beeswax that makes up candles, or even artificial waxes like carnauba or something like that, or surfboard wax. That would fall into this category of molecule. These are very large carbon-hydrogen molecules, and they have almost nothing except carbon and hydrogen in them. The others had lots of nitrogen and phosphorus, and these will have a little bit of those other ones, but it's almost all carbon and hydrogen, which means that they don't like to hang out with water. They're hydrophobic, which is why oils and water don't mix, and why it's very hard to melt butter in a pot of boiling water and stir it in. The butter keeps cooling on top because they don't like water. These are the kinds of molecules that your body uses for long-term energy storage. And so a plant that gets a ton of food builds starches, builds lots and lots of sugar chains. An animal that gets lots of food gets fat. And this is the long-term energy storage. This is the I may need this someday when my food supply runs out molecule. It's also the primary component of cell membranes. So you are some great number of cells. Some textbooks say 3 trillion. The video we watched just said 50 trillion. You're lots and lots and lots of cells. Okay, and all of those cells are surrounded by membranes, and the membrane is almost all lipid. So you want to have a low-fat diet so that you don't get fat, but you do need to eat fat, because every time your body makes another cell, it needs some fat to make the membrane. So it's the major component of cell membranes. The little molecule that serves as the monomer is really not all that little. There's very few small lipid molecules. But the monomer is called a fatty acid, and even the fatty acid is pretty long. Okay, but it's the smaller of the kinds of fats. And then there are polymers of fats, and there's two main kinds. There's a steroid, which is a fatty ring, a fatty acid that's been turned into a ring and then joined to other rings. And so it's a group of 5 rings, looks kind of like an Olympic symbol, sort of, in chemistry. And that ring of fatty acids is called a steroid, and your body uses those to communicate. It's like chemical messages across your body. And then triglycerides are just 3 fatty acids that have been joined together at their top. So it looks like a bar with 3 tails. 3 fatty acids hanging off of a joining molecule across the top. Triglyceride is the most common form of a fat molecule in your body. And so those are lipids, and they're the energy storers. Nucleic acids, we just saw the video on. They're the genetic carrier molecule. They are what carry information from one generation to the next, and carry information for what to do in your body and what chemicals are needed. And not, I keep saying your body, but all living things, right? What makes one pea pod plant like its parent pea pod plant, those a lot of peas, is because of DNA, right? It's not just people. The monomers are nucleotides. That's the small molecule that gets repeated a whole bunch of times. The polymers are DNA or RNA. And the video went through some of the main differences between those two. Now, proteins are made by reading DNA. DNA creates proteins, and this is on your advanced organizer and it is on the exam. DNA creates proteins, and proteins make DNA. And so those two build each other. All of the enzymes that the video talked about that you don't need to know the name of for the test, all of those enzymes that were on the video are proteins. And all of those proteins were made by reading DNA. So the DNA has the information for building proteins, and the proteins are necessary to make the DNA, which gets you into kind of a chicken and the egg question. Well, what came first? Were there proteins to assemble DNA, or was there DNA to have the information to make proteins, right? They need each other. You have to have both to have an organism. So this is one of the challenges for biochemists who don't believe in God, is because in order to have life, you have to have DNA. Nothing that is alive does not have DNA, okay? But in order for DNA to be built, you have to have proteins. So the thing had to have proteins to build its DNA, but the proteins that build the DNA are created by the information in the DNA. So you can't have protein to build the DNA without the DNA to build the protein. And so if you don't believe that God made a living thing with DNA and proteins at the same time, you're in this unsolvable spiral, right? And it's a beautiful thing because you can't have one without the other. So which came first? They had to come together, and they had to both randomly evolve in the same little puddle of slime. Now, drop a grenade on that idea. It's done, right? You have to have a creator God. Here's some pictures. This is, you've seen a video with better pictures than this, but a nucleotide is a group of a sugar and a phosphate and some other molecule. Where's my mouse? There it is. And, let's move my video down again. That is a nucleotide, and you don't need to know the structure of it now. Come chapter 5, you will. And then DNA is a double helix. It's two sides that go the opposite direction. One goes this way and one goes this way. And every time there's an A on one side, there's a T on the other. Every time there's a G on one side, there's a C on the other. Okay, that's my lecture. What holes on the advanced organizer do you have that I can answer for you? Okay, cool.